What is going on, everybody? How are y'all doing this evening? It is Monday night. It is December 20th, and the Chicago Bears dropped off a wonderful lump of coal for the fans right before Christmas. How nice of them! I mean, goodness gracious. We're going to talk about this on the podcast, and for those of you who don't know, this is Bill Zimmerman, going to be here with us, executive producer of Mad Dog Radio, the host of Windy City Gridiron's Bears Banter. Like, Bill, I feel like we have both a lot to talk about and nothing at all new, right?
Yeah, right. That's where it is at this point. There's so much to talk about, but it's so much of the things we've already addressed for 4 months of podcasts. But yeah, I really feel like December is really becoming like the Schmitz and Zimmerman show here. You were on my podcast last week.
Yep.
I'm on your podcast this week. We did the little pop-up podcast a couple weeks ago with the Nagy news.
Oh, yeah.
That wasn't news. Yeah.
I mean,
we've been all over here, so let's do it again.
I hit the point at this stage of Bear With Me where, like, I feel as if doing a post-game show is like doing a graveyard shift. I mean, maybe it's a feeling. Maybe all the fans out there are like, "No, frick yeah, post-game show." But I'm sitting here like, we watched a game where Kirk Cousins had the least yards he's ever had, which is why we lost by technically one score, but it was 2 scores there for a long time. A long time. I mean, Bill, I keep sitting here thinking about this, right? I'm like, the Chicago Bears had Kendall Vildor and Thomas Graham starting for them, right? Thomas Graham, who could not break the roster. All the people with hindsight 2020, let's remember what it was, right? This was the D Virgin game. This was Tease, Tabor, and a starting safety. I think it was Deion Bush, who, a whole bunch of straight up nobodies. It was all the guys who couldn't make the roster otherwise, and they held Kirk to under 100 passing yards. How did we lose? Like, it's one of those, if you told me that. You know what I mean?
It's 100%. Like you said, Kirk Cousins completed only, I think it was 50% of his passes. He threw under 100 yards. Dalvin Cook just barely over 3 yards a carry. The Chicago Bears offense nearly doubled the Vikings in yardage for the game. I mean, just by 10 or 15 yards, they almost doubled it. Like, you'd sit there and go, and the only thing you don't get to look at is turnovers, which of course, we'll get to. And that was, part of the reason for the downfall here. But the fact of the matter is, if you just looked at the statistics straight out of the box without looking at the score, you would think the Bears cruised to a victory here.
I mean, a meaningless one, right? Like, this was that perfect setup, right, Bill, for the moment of, it's a 5-9 win. Who cares? We've got the Vikings number. Their fans all want to fire Zimmer and have for quite some time, right? So who cares that the Bears, wait, they lost? You said they lost that game? Like, it's one of those where you list everything out and you miss the Demare Bird punt, or like punt muff that goes straight. I mean, look, I don't want to score punt muffs, Maybe this is just the fact that this is a true post-game take. That was one of those that was just so woeful. I don't know what to do with it emotionally, Bill. Like, it was, I almost wasn't even truly disappointed. I was just angry. Like,
well, I mean, Demare Bird here, his performance today overall, I mean, there were some balls that hit him square in the hands, and he had 1 or 2 drops. I mean, there were other drops that by some other guys as well. But it gets down to the bottom line here of who is going to help Justin Fields out offensively because maybe Darnell Mooney does a little bit. I know David Montgomery can get the ball, can get the running game established. They just don't have guys. They don't have guys where Fields kind of puts an okay ball towards them and they still make the catch. Like, the Fields throws have to be perfect. The balls are getting dropped. There's no separation half the time. It's really frustrating to watch this team perform.
Right. And I know I saw one comment, Jordan, I don't want to leave you hanging. I hear you to anybody who was super excited about Thomas Graham, I feel like the trouble is right. Like my 2 cents is, as somebody who was excited about Thomas Graham, is you're getting excited about 2019 tape and a player that struggled really badly in the 2021 preseason, which is mostly man on man. And so for a player, Bill, I have no idea how well you know Thomas Graham's draft repertoire, but in case you didn't, he's a zone guy. Very, very heady player. Like, I think really special in terms of the way he processes the offense in front of him. And I mean, as you saw tonight, right? Like, he had one pass breakup off of pure recognition there in the red zone, another pass breakup off of inducing a throw by Kirk Cousins, and then a third one that was just solid man-on-man coverage. Like, that, he had a really good game, but it was going to take him a second. Like, to the people calling for Graham, it was one of those where he took a whole year off of football. His preseason tape wasn't good because I don't think he was there yet, personally. And I'm not trying to by any means say that that means Graham was bad. It's more to say that there are some of these guys that you draft them, they need a year of just practice, get used to the NFL speed of things, learn the defense, etc., etc. Graham was one of those guys I feel like was going to, look, he came on in a bigger way than I would have anticipated, but it's a matter of, had he gone in earlier, would he have played this well? Heck if I know. But it's definitely not the Kindle Vildor kind of situation where he blew coverage again, man. Like, I feel so bad for 22. Where on a night with only backups in, for crying out loud. He's still.
Yeah, that second touchdown, I'm like, oh, there it is, 22. Oh, Kindle. But yeah, you mentioned Thomas Graham. Yeah, let's talk about it a second. He had an outstanding game. He was a big reason why Cousins performed as poorly as he did. He had great pass breakups, like you said. He was anticipating. He was being where he needed to be. Now that's interesting. I hadn't really thought about the man coverage in preseason versus zone, and I saw Lester Wiltfong, our big boss man of Windy City Gridiron, tweet out that, and like you said, Thomas Graham did not play in 2020. You lose that year of football, then you come in as a late round rookie to try and perform and make a team out of preseason where they're playing more. I've got ESPN on. I just see Kindle Vildor get torched for the touchdown.
So sad.
But you just see a guy who has to get back into football shape and playing.
It's hard.
And just that year that he missed. Now I'll sit there and say, where was Graham's, growth in practice? That's something we don't know about. I'm not saying he should have made the roster straight out in September and been the starting nickelback or anything like that. But, could he have been playing a month ago, 5-6 weeks ago, and be doing better than the struggling secondary that we've had? That's where my question is. And that's one that's impossible to answer.
Mm-hmm. I mean, the other thing, because I guess that's exactly the question, Bill, that I would ask. And for the sake of just, I don't know, I don't want to call it brevity, but, and by the way, at Kusai, that was super weird. They kept calling him Robert Graham, which drove me nuts because I actually knew a Robert Graham in high school, and that was not obviously who was playing. But so Thomas isn't a huge guy either. Like, I don't want to say he can't play at outside corner, but I know I've had him pegged mentally as a nickel for quite some time. Well, the best part is, Bill, is that the headier your nickel, the better they get at pass-offs, right? They're able to send a crossing route through to the next linebacker and still make the drive to the other side. Like, that's what made Bryce Callahan so good, is that you couldn't just pick him off with a false route and squeeze something in on short yardage. I'm hopeful that Graham, if he doesn't end up tested, which, by the way, if you want some footage, I can send it to you. He actually faced up against Ayuk in 2019, so you got to see that rare collegiate matchup of, oh, shoot, that's a really good receiver across from him. But yeah, you get the idea. Graham had a great day. Yeah, I did hear the Kildor thing. That was so goofy. But so, are you ready to start recording?
What's it?
You ready to go? You ready to start recording?
Yeah, ready to go.
Let's do it. Because this is like the warm-up show, the live warm-up show. All right. What's going on, everybody, and welcome back to Bear With Me, a Chicago Bears podcast celebrating the mathematical elimination of the 2021 Chicago Bears and more than likely the Matt Nagy era. We are here today with myself, Robert Schmitz, your host, and Mad Dog Radio with SiriusXM's Bill Zimmerman, the WCG host of Bears Banter. Bill, I just got to be on your show last week. Only fitting that we ring in the holiday season with another Bears season ender. How are you feeling after Monday Night Football?
I mean, let's just say the emotions are confusing right now because, I'll be the first to admit at this point, I'm not really invested in wins and losses at this point. I've said on my podcast a number of times that I haven't really been invested in wins and losses for most of the season because I kind of expected the Bears. I maybe thought the record would be a bit better, but I expected the Bears to be here at this point with this roster and where they were headed. But at this point in the season, you watch this game and you sit there and you see some promising things from Justin Fields and you see a surprising performance from a defense that we assumed was going to give up 400 passing yards to Kirk Cousins. And they had an unbelievable performance. The Bears offense almost doubled the Vikings offense in terms of output in yardage, and they were never in the game. It's really, you just don't even know how to wrap your head around a game like this.
Oh, I mean, like, I'll repackage something that we talked about in the preview show. So, Bill, it's Sunday night. You're asleep, right? And I, as a specter, visit you in a dream and whisper to you that tomorrow young cornerback Thomas Graham is going to show out in a phenomenal way. And he, Robert Quinn, and a possessed Akeem Hicks are going to lead the Bears to an interception. They're going to hold Kirk Cousins to not only 100 passing yards, but his lowest yardage total ever at any point. And you wake up on Monday, what do you think happens to the game? Like, no way we lose, right?
Right. I'd sit there and go, well, then Dalvin Cook, if we lost, must have had 200 yards of offense. No, Dalvin Cook was contained as well. They did such a great job defensively. Tip of the cap to Sean Desai for this one. And the fact it's remarkable. And it comes down here and you see some meatheads sitting there trying to complain about the defense or this or that. But in this particular game, this comes down to offensive execution, and on a lot of plays, it was putrid.
Oh, it was awful. And before we get into the bad stuff, because we've spent, the better part of a year now talking about the bad stuff, there's somebody who I think we have to call out by name. I already mentioned Graham, and I already kind of alluded to this guy, but I feel like, Bill, we can't go this podcast without saying that the Bears defense with Hicks and the Bears defense without Akeem Hicks from 2019 to 2021 is probably a more noticeable drop-off than anyone else on their roster. Am I crazy for thinking this? I've defended a lot of different defenders, but Hicks on the field versus Hicks is not on the field has had one of the biggest impacts from a heart and soul perspective. I almost can't put it into words. It feels intangible. You know what I mean?
It really is, and Hicks does. He has that, that personality that it'll infect the whole defense, and I mean that obviously in a positive way. He had, his presence was felt today. This felt like a 2018, 2019 Akeem Hicks that we really haven't seen that often. He was a wrecking ball. He was a force in the pass rush. He made tackles for loss. He was disruptive. That it's an Akeem Hicks that, when he's present like that, you don't notice the missing Khalil Mack as much because you can have the Hicks-Quinn tandem, which, by the way, Robert Quinn, have we ever seen a turnaround of a guy who was so bad one season and is at the point now, he is at the cusp of breaking Richard Dent's sack record for the Chicago Bears for most sacks in a season. He has been a force from day one this year.
He's got 3 games to get 1.5, right? Like, that's all he needs to tie it. At this point, Bill, the only way that I can put it, right? I don't even have flowery and nice words to say anymore because it's almost irrelevant. The truth is, Bill, when we hear he's banged up or, he's hurt, and we've started, because if you're like me, especially when somebody crests 30, we've started to just sort of discount that and say, okay, come on, he's aging. Like, injuries sort of come with it. we've gotten this rare opportunity to see a 33-year-old completely healthy human being and how that compares to a 32-year-old with drop foot and nerve damage. And it is so different. It's just stunning, right? Like
it really is. And I'll throw this out at you right now because, and I know it's a post-game show. We got to focus on the field, but I'm going to throw this at you. You get hired to replace Ryan Pace, and George McCaskey looks at you, or the new president, whoever it is, and says, Robert, what do we do with Robert Quinn? Do we trade him, or do we make sure he's lining up on the edge next season?
Oh, gosh. I mean, so it's so funny because if George is asking me, right, then I have to think about it the same way he does. I have to think about ticket sales. I have to think about who goes on the poster, right? I have to think about how when an NBC inevitably puts Bears-Packers in Sunday Night Football again, who are they going to show, right? Like
at least get the game at home so we have a chance. It's in Lambeau
every time. But that's one thing. But oh my gosh, Bill, like that trade argument, it only gets louder, especially since the 2022 team doesn't necessarily look like it's going to be a Super Bowl contender. I don't want to be all team building either. We can get there, but man, oh man, how would somebody not be a buyer? Because every sack Quinn gets makes his contract actually start to look a little amenable. Like, sure. We thought only a year ago it was, and I quote, an absolute albatross. But at this stage, with him turning in a 16-sack season, if the season ended today, and it doesn't, like, he's actually kind of on a deal. Like, he's being paid what was market worth 3 years ago. Like,
right.
Oh, man, there's a contender that I feel like, I mean, come on, Bill. Everybody wants edge help, right? And if you could get a second-round pick for Robert Quinn, who probably doesn't have 4 good seasons left in him, that's a steal for a team that, let's put it this way, to get back to postgame, I feel like as I watch the Bears offense, we could really use the talent. You know what I mean?
Just, yeah, a little bit of help on offense, just a little bit. But, when we look at the offensive side of the ball, I'm going to ask you a question, and the answer is as obvious as you think it is. When I ask you, who is the most dangerous player offensively for the Chicago Bears?
Oh, gosh. So I would tell you Justin Fields, in my personal opinion.
And that's the answer I'm looking for.
Okay, good. Then there you go.
So if he's the most dangerous player on the field, why are the Chicago Bears leading the NFL in Wildcat snaps?
Oh, man. So first of all, that answer actually could partially be included in Justin Fields' mistakes this evening, where if you give Justin a whole yard, he tends to try to take the entire yard and maybe a little bit more, and that can lead to some mistakes. Like, if there is a moment, and I can't believe we're jumping into criticizing Fields, like, this really is the current blemish in his football game. It's that whether it's trying to attempt a jump pass on a screen that leaves him with no good option, if he's not able to throw that ball, or trying to break inside on a defender that's diving inside on him. So that's obviously going to be a ball security issue for literally anybody, lest he spin, which has gotten him into enough trouble in the past. Fields will try to make too much of a play, but gracious alive, Bill, that doesn't excuse it, right? I mean, I'll do you one better. The first 10 first and 10 scenarios, I'm throwing out a first and 18 that happened immediately. So first and downs that were first and 10, the first 10 of them were runs. This was a trend that we saw. No matter the situation, we were running the ball, which is great until it's 2nd and 11 and you're behind the chains. The offense doesn't know how to do anything, right? And everything just seems to fall apart. I don't want to pretend like Justin Fields had some game today where he looked and felt like he was perfect, and we can only talk about him as if he was totally faultless. That's not the point I think either you and I are trying to make here. But man, oh man, it feels like a Vikings team that was desperate at corner and poor in linebacker coverage, where they really had like Harrison Smith, a decent second safety whose name escapes me at this moment, and then just sort of a bunch of guys. But they had Michael Pierce, they had Anthony Barr, they've got some talent on the defensive line. Of course, the Bears offensive staff schemed up a game plan entirely around attacking that defensive line, because that makes sense. when
Yeah,
those
exactly.
corners
And
were
Eric
sitting there.
Hendricks before he got ejected.
Right.
I sit there and go, this is, I was excited for this game for one reason, is I wanted to see Justin Fields attack a pretty weak secondary. That's what I wanted to see. And I understand the Vikings defense was softer in the fourth quarter. I'm not an idiot. But the fact of the matter is when they fell behind enough where you let Justin Fields attack the secondary, he had an obscene amount of success. And like I said, I understand part of it had to do with Vikings scheming. But the fact that there was just little of that at all for 3.5 quarters just boggles the mind. They're sitting there going, let's try and make, David Montgomery the leading receiver on the team. The lack of awareness sometimes by this offensive coaching staff is astounding.
Oh, yeah. I mean, especially since now that we're finally seeing Justin Fields, where somebody said it in the comment section here on the live show, but I think it bears repeating. Fields was, I'll quote this person, generally good with about 5 or 6 god-awful plays mixed in, which I actually feel like is a pretty good way to put it, Bill. And I mean, let's remember what we're talking about here. We're talking about NFL quarterback. Sometimes, especially during the Trubisky eras, I could say it. Like, I stand by everything that I said during that time, but Bill, we do tend, as Chicago, to take quarterback as you need to be perfect all the time, because we haven't had one good enough to teach us how often a good quarterback makes mistakes, right? And so Fields was, I don't think there's any way to put it, undoubtedly the better quarterback today. And way, way underproductive in terms of points. I mean, it was rough watching Justin. Yes, he made mistakes, no doubt, right? But the plays that he did make, the plays that he did deliver, sure, he dealt with some drops. Those actually aren't what I'm thinking about. I thought his 4th and 9 throw to Mooney was good enough for a touchdown, didn't end up in the end zone. I thought Jimmy Graham had a 50-50-ish shot at the ball that he had in the end zone, didn't end up a touchdown. Like, there were mistakes all over the field. Some by his teammates, some just rough luck, but gosh, it feels like they can't catch a break from number 1 on,
And they really can't. And some of them is a lack of execution. Some of it is mistakes. Penalties play into a part a lot of times where they shoot themselves in the foot, and a bad holding penalty or a bad personal foul call. And next thing you know, a drive is stymied that way. It happens all the time. And what we're seeing here, what we saw again, especially today, is we are seeing an offense that even when it's clicking and moving the football, and I don't know if you want to say the offense was clicking, but they were moving the football today better than the Vikings were. Even when that's the case, when they get to the 20-yard line, they turn into a bunch of 8-year-olds playing against the NFL elite. They cannot execute a play. They cannot gain a yard. They cannot, whether it's the play call where you sit there and go, why aren't you trying to use, the skill set of Justin Fields more in the red zone to make him more of a threat? Why aren't we doing that? Why are we, dropping, balls on a consistent basis? There's so many issues with this red zone offense that I don't even know where to start.
And I mean, look, I'm not a coach, right? I wish I had some kind of magic serum or something that I could use to suss this out. Because you're right, Bill, it's all over the place. But the positive that I could mention is that I feel like Justin Fields is managing the pocket a lot better. He took 2 sacks today. They were obviously both very bad, and we don't need to. Not a lot of positives there. If anything, glad that Justin was able to recover the fumble on that screen sack. But other than that, Bill, we saw Fields take a fumble in the Baltimore game from stepping up in the pocket a little bit rashly. Now he's stepping up vertically when he needs to. He's threatening scrambles sometimes, but also checking it down consistently. He's extending plays in both the red zone and just regular Joe Schmo downs in the middle of the field. Fields is starting to look on a down-to-down basis like a quarterback that can handle himself in the NFL, and I hope I'm not ruffling too many feathers to say he didn't look like that at the start of the year. I feel like what nobody really had thought about. It dawned on me at like maybe week 7. Look, it's not like I was early to the party, right? But coming out of Ohio State, moving from a team where his guys were just, like his teammates, were just better than everybody, right? That he knew his receiver could get open, that it wasn't a question Chris Olave was going to beat the corner across from him at Rutgers or Michigan State, that as he's adjusted to the NFL, he's overcome a subtle rawness, right? That mainly has favored quarterbacks like Drew Brees from Purdue or Tom Brady, 6th-round draft pick, obviously out of Michigan. You look at a lot of the quarterbacks that have been successful, they've come from, I don't want to say lower tier programs, but they haven't been those upper echelon guys. And I wonder if part of it is this hurdle you have to overcome of kind of getting used to your teammates not automatically being better than everybody. But I feel like, and I'll finally pass things over to you, Bill, after this long-winded way of saying it, Fields is starting to look like a more complete quarterback, that it's not flash in the pan and then absolutely ugly. We're seeing his baseline raise a lot higher than it was at the start of the season, and I think that's the key to development, right? It's not even about raising the highs. It's about raising that floor.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think that's a good way to put it. And I'll kind of walk through the season here a little bit. Like you said, the beginning of the year, it was not good. And I understand the Browns game wasn't all Justin Fields' fault. That was a mess of an offensive game plan, mess of an offensive line. I get all of that. But early on in the season, it looked like Justin Fields was simply not ready to be on an NFL field. Then we got to that Lions game where Fields showed you the elite arm talent. It was really the first time we saw that elite arm talent. Then we kind of saw the leadership and the toughness kind of come through in that Raiders game. The Packers game, he was inconsistent, but that was really the first time you saw him put together a couple drives where he looked complete for a full drive and put together, I don't have the numbers in front of me, but long scoring, sustained drives. He had 2 touchdown drives against the Packers.
Only the drives. To your point,
right?
Like,
and the rest of the time there was inconsistencies and problems. Then you get kind of into the San Francisco and the Pittsburgh games where we started seeing it really click for him a little bit more. Ravens game, he didn't finish the game, and he didn't look good for when he was in there. And now we're kind of seeing it with this Packers and this Vikings game where you're seeing a more complete quarterback. You still get every once in a while, you'll get the flashy run play. You'll get the beautiful deep ball. You'll see those flashy plays, but it's, there's still like the jump pass today was horrendous. There's no defending that. And some of the times where he just keeps running backwards in the second in the backfield to avoid sacks, and a 6-yard sack ends up being a 19-yard sack or whatever it is. These are things where he has to kind of, and I understand he's going to want to try and use his athleticism to extend plays, and that's going to happen from time to time. But sometimes he just doesn't know when to cut bait and just get to the sideline and chuck the ball out of bounds. And that's enough for your athleticism, is to avoid the 6-yard loss and get the ball out of bounds so you can live to play another day on 2nd and 10 or 3rd and 10 or whatever it might be instead of 3rd and 24. So there's still the mistakes, but I agree with you. What we're seeing is more consistent quarterback play, especially from the 20 to the 20. Still obviously issues with the red zone, which aren't all Justin's fault. But yeah, I agree with you. That's kind of how we've seen this season progress. We have a few more games against some not so impressive defenses, so hopefully we can continue to see him grow.
Hopefully. I love it. I mean, come on, Bill. I thought going into this game, he and the offense were going to be the only thing worth watching. Can we just agree that was completely wrong and totally backwards? Because seriously, the only thing fun about this game was the defense. The offense was hard to watch. And oh my gosh, I don't know. Which part hurt to you more, Bill, right? What is it? The 4th and 1 where Darnell Mooney was placed in the backfield only so that he could run out and Fields had nowhere to go. The ball ends up turned over on downs. The muffed punt by Demir Bird, or something else like let's just say it, some of the officiating calls really drove a lot of people crazy. Like, which was your least favorite part of this game?
That's all right. That's a tough one because there's a lot to choose from. The problem with a lot of these, and I'll bring up the muff punt. There were some bad play. I don't think Deion Bush deserved the penalty he got. I think there were some bad calls, but I will say there were a couple calls, especially on the interception, that the refs did miss a couple, for the Bears' favor as well. But, and it's consistently the one thing that does bother me is the amount of times Justin Fields gets pummeled and there is no help from the officiating. They just don't come and help him at all, and at least let the defense think for a second that there might actually be a penalty if they actually hit the quarterback. So until that happens, the defenses are still going to keep coming after him. But I would say I was most frustrated. I guess I kind of just laughed and shook my head, but I was probably most frustrated with that with the Bird muff punt, because
it was bad.
Every time I felt like I said, the Bears were never really in this. The Vikings scored early. The game was always close, but you just never felt the Bears were going to get back into it. And it was because every time the Bears had an opportunity where the defense would make a stop and be like, okay, here it goes. And I kind of felt that with that Bird play. And it's just like at that moment with that Bird play, to me, it was at the point where I said, it doesn't matter what happens in this game. The Bears will prevent themselves from winning.
Yeah, I mean, yes, right? And to speak on the penalties, I feel like there are so many of these where I get the impression, Bill, people will go, what are you calling unnecessary roughness on Travis Gibson for? What are you talking about? He didn't do anything. They must have, oh no, he pushed him. Yeah, no, he instigated it. Never mind. That's just a bad penalty. Like the Tease Tabor one, I think you said Deion Bush, but you're thinking Tease Tabor on that low block, right? That one was really weird. And I see where the ref was coming from. I just disagree. Now, I feel like it's very on the line. Like the offensive lineman turned around for it immediately, almost as if the NFL had sent out some kind of a mail tape, and that was like a textbook case to be on it, and Tabor had just happened to make the tackle afterwards. I don't know. But the Vikings lineman looked for it immediately. Like he looked at the ref, asked for it, not dissimilarly to Justin Fields turning around and asking for a personal foul on that ridiculous post kneel down late hit that we saw, that if that hadn't have been called, I would be still yelling about it and would have started from the start of this presser or from this post game show. But yeah, I mean, I think the one flag that I'm truly just cool with was Tevin Jenkins's, which is going to make me sound so old school football, but for crying out loud, I am perfectly fine with anything you take sticking up for your quarterback, especially since Sheldon Richardson jumped over and sucker punched him before he started throwing hands. Like, I don't know what you saw, because Bill, you're the one who played offensive line. You've been in those scrums, but I have to imagine that there's just so much hot breath and emotion going on that a little bit of extra, let's call it aggression, I don't personally have an issue with it. But other than that, rough game from the discipline perspective. It felt like there was always a yellow flag to set the Bears back whenever they did anything right.
Yeah, no, the penalties were an issue. And yeah, if you want to give Tevin Jenkins a break, because if the referees aren't going to protect Justin Fields, then the offensive line better. And while Jenkins hasn't been on the field much with Fields this year, obviously because of the injury, you like to see that, because, as someone who was older and has seen the Bears a little bit longer than some of the people who are listening to this podcast, not all, but there's plenty. I'm going to rewind the clock to the Cade McNown era. And the reason I'm going to do that is because the Chicago Bears offensive line hated Cade McNown. There was a story, and I don't know who wrote it, that an unnamed source says that at times the Chicago Bears are missing blocks because they do not want to put the effort forth for Cade McNown. And the next day, or maybe it was 2 days later, James Big Cat Williams was wearing a t-shirt that just said "The Source." That's the kind of stuff where that just did not give a you-know-what about Cade McNown and the offense, because it was so dysfunctional. You can't have that. That offensive line needs to protect Cade McNown, or it needs to protect Justin Fields like it's a puppy crossing traffic. Like, they need to do everything they can to keep him safe. And when you see Tevin Jenkins seeing that stuff happening on the sidelines and immediately coming over and telling the defense, knock that out or you're going to deal with me, because I am a giant human being and I'm larger than you, that's what you need out of your offensive line. They need to have that sense of protection about Fields, not just because the scheme says you're supposed to, slide left or you're supposed to do this and get this man. They need to do it because they want to keep him upright. There's a passion to it involved, and Jenkins has it, and hopefully that materializes into him being a solid tackle.
That is a hilarious story. And yet, Jenkins used to clean up the fouls. He had a false start, a hold, and a personal foul today. So I'm talking flags in general. That's 7 in 8 quarters. Not anybody's ideal start to their NFL career, but I won't actually speak on his play because I don't tend to see the offensive line the first time around. I don't know about you, but I really don't.
Speaking of penalties, can we also tip the cap to Daz Newsome for offsides on the offense? I don't know if I've ever seen.
I mean, only as long. So insofar as long as Bill, I want to stick to passion a little bit, because if there was a game that I feel like has encapsulated the bad part of the Nagy era, right? Like, let's for a moment put 2018 on ice. What does 2019, 2020, and 2021 look like? It's looked like this high effort, super ugly game where a bunch of things go wrong and it's mostly the team's fault, right? And that was encapsulated by no one better than Matt Nagy taking a personal foul to kick off the game and having one of the most WWE moments I have ever seen in the NFL as he stood on the sidelines. You saw this, right? With the referee, the whole crowd going, yes, challenge it, yes. And then he pulls out his challenge flag, emphatically spikes it on the ground, and they don't even count it. The sky judge comes in, who you didn't know was there, right? But he goes, no worries, we already got you. But he got that moment. He got that moment.
Like you just needed Jim Ross yelling, "He threw the flag! He threw the flag!
I can't believe it! Wow! He's cashing in his money in the bank!" But yeah, I mean, there's a lot of things about this game. I don't know, between last week's Matt Nagy quote of I'm having fun before them getting dumpstered in the back half, and this game right here, I feel like we got that final Nagy moment where, and I'm reading, I haven't gotten the chance to listen to it, it sounds like it's an extremely sad post-game presser for Nagy where, and I quote, he said, oh wow, Matt Nagy on the struggles of the Bears offense during his tenure, it starts and ends with me. I accept complete responsibility for that. It's not even coded language anymore, Bill. I almost feel like it's not even passionate at this stage to say I want the Bears to just let him go, like do the poor man almost a favor, do the locker room a favor. Like if we're going to start the change-making process, don't you think mathematical elimination is a decent time to do that?
It is a good time to do it, and maybe they do it here coming off of Monday Night Football. But I will say this, with the fact that they have a COVID mess right now, and they're coming into what's going to be a short week coming off Monday Night Football, I'm guessing Nagy does survive this week. But I would not be surprised. They could go and beat Seattle next week. I don't think it matters. If they want to move on and take advantage of the rule, they could beat Seattle 44-0. It does not matter. You can let him go on that Monday and begin interviewing candidates because, you do need to let Nagy go. That decision can come from George. But again, if you're going to interview candidates early, you need to have, and we've talked about this before, you need to have a front office structure. And if you're keeping Ryan Pace and announce you're keeping Ryan Pace, it's not the right move. But at some point, if you're going to take advantage of it, I don't need you hiring Ernie Accorsi to come in and hire a new coach before you bring in a front office executive. You gotta do it in the right order. And the Bears have sat here and, in essence, it's the same thing in January. What did George do? George didn't want to make a decision, so he put, Pace and Nagy in an impossible situation to develop a quarterback and make the playoffs. Those things basically can't be married together, except on very rare occurrences. And now we're sitting here the same thing. He wanted, I think, I don't know this for sure, but it certainly seems, he wanted to make sure Matt Nagy had the opportunity to make the playoffs. So he was going to ride with him as long as possible, as long as the Bears were in the hunt on those graphics, which we saw going into this week at 4-9, they were still in the hunt. But now we're sitting here going, they haven't made a decision on anything. There's only 3 weeks to go in the season. Jacksonville needs a new coach. The Raiders can potentially, even though the Raiders may have the guy they want to keep, who knows? But the Raiders, because Gruden was the coach, they are allowed to interview people. So that's two teams here that can interview head coaching candidates, and the Chicago Bears cannot.
Hey,
and if you do fire Nagy, you're still not going to have the right guy doing the interviews if you are going to bring in, potential head coaching candidates. So the Bears are kind of putting themselves in a situation here where, regardless of what happens in the next week with Matt Nagy, they're still not going to be able to take advantage of that new rule and interview head coaching candidates early, at least not by the right people.
That's true. And not to mention, based on the rumors that we're seeing about them potentially doing their homework on general manager candidates, like I've seen, I think it was a Glazer report. I can't quite remember, but we're seeing that pop up with a couple different sources here. Like, ooh, we'll see. And I've got more to say about that, but the sponsors have got to get their word in at some point, Bill. And so we're going to step aside. We'll be right back to talk the final thoughts on Bears postgame, game balls, you name it. We'll be right back. And we are back with Bear With Me. I'm here with Bill Zimmerman, Sirius XM producer and Bears Banter host. Bill, thanks so much for coming on. I have to ask, does it say something bad about me? Am I vindictive? Am I mean, Bill, that I am just eating up every time that they put Pace on camera in a game like this and we watch him squirm a little bit? Like, I can't remember who it was in the Windy City Cadre that said it, but somebody talked about how, like, Pace's shadow boss style of shoving Matt Nagy out in front of every crisis, but being there to take credit for anything that goes well, really has started to rub me the wrong way over time. And so when they showed Pace and the McCaskey family and all the people that I feel like at the very top of the Bears organization are just as much part of the problem as the poor bald man running around on the sidelines with no idea what he's doing, there was something inside of me that smiled on late Monday night. So tell me, am I broken from inside out?
No, you're not broken. You're a Bears fan. And see, that's the thing. So if you are broken, Bears Nation is broken. And here's the good thing about the vast majority of Bears fans. And they understand the problem. When the national media, for the most part, they skate in and they look at this and go, well, Nagy's scheme is a mess and they're not winning. The talent's not there. So, Nagy needs to go or Pace needs to go or maybe both. And that's what you're going to get from the national media. But the Bears fans have lived this existence for their entire lives, whether that be 20, 30, 40, 70, 80 years. It doesn't matter. And what they have learned to know, especially since in the last 30 to 35 years, especially then. Now, I'll sit here and say, and Jeff Burks is a great guy to talk about. George Halas, who is just idolized, and I understand, founder of the NFL, amazing things in the 30s and 40s. George Halas goofed a lot of stuff up for the Bears from 1950 to 1980. A lot. I know they won a championship, but he let a lot of guys go. So when I say you can be 60, 70, 80 years old and just know this woe of the Bears, it even dates back to Halas. The organization is not run well, and it's frustrating. And, and I know people like to point the finger at Ted Phillips, and Ted Phillips isn't making football decisions, but Ted Phillips is still the president of the team, and Ryan Pace reports to Ted Phillips, and Ted Phillips doesn't know what he's watching on the football field. So he can't hold Ryan Pace accountable. The only thing he can hold Ryan Pace accountable for is the record. He doesn't know enough of the ins and outs of what this football operations is about. And George is the same way. And the McCaskies are here. When I had Brad Biggs on, Brad doesn't seem to think that the McCaskies are going anywhere anytime soon. I know some people are hopeful that maybe they're setting up to sell with this Arlington Heights deal. Biggs doesn't think that, so I'll go with Biggs. If the McCaskies are here, it is of the utmost importance that this team has the right front office structure, whether it be a president of business operations and a president of football operations, and you split Ted Phillips' role, whatever it might be. I think, I understand how important the head coach is for Justin Fields' development. They need to figure out front office, assuming Pace is gone, assuming Nagy's gone, they need to figure out front office structure, because it hasn't been here pretty much since George Halas died, and it can't continue this way, or we as Bears fans will continue to be broken.
Right. And I mean, it's just It's just so unbelievably frustrating watching this team at the moment because, like you're saying, they need change. They need change in a big way, but it feels like just to tie it back to the game itself, Bill, as if whether it's Thomas Graham popping off, and I completely understand. I was one of the people out there that was saying, hey, if he's on the practice squad, I mean, I know he's a zone-based corner, a heady corner. I don't know what it's like or I don't know how he's doing, like how he is in week 10, Bill, versus week 12, because we don't get to go to practice, unfortunately. But if he's on the practice squad, maybe he needs to be there. Well, he's elevated and immediately outplays, I think, anything we've seen at second corner. He had his reps against Justin Jefferson. He had his reps against the other Vikings receivers. It's not like they had a ton. But I don't want to go over my skis here, Bill. It just feels as if whether it's Jesper Horsted, now tied for the leader in tight end touchdown catches over Cole Kmet and tied with Jimmy Graham, who gets like 5 snaps a game. I can't understand a lot of the talent evaluation across this roster. And for every Larry Borum, a hit in the 5th round, or Thomas Graham, or Khalil Herbert, or whatever other player you want to pick on, Eddie Jackson, Tariq Cohen, Jordan Howard, there are a lot of them, right? It feels as if this Bears roster, there's always a Damiere Byrd ready to drop a key pass on 3rd down or 4th down that he absolutely could have had. There's only Darnell Mooney as a viable wide receiver in the red zone at this stage, which is ridiculous, right? Like, the talent across this Bears roster drives me nuts because the high parts feel like they were under-evaluated, and the low parts are really, really obvious, and the Bears are, unfortunately, a deserved 4-10 team at this stage. Like, maybe the Pittsburgh loss I'd look at and say, that's unlucky. But this is that rare game or team, Bill, that is absolutely as bad as its record says. You know what I mean?
Yeah, no, the roster is not good. And that's why, look, Ryan Pace, I don't think Ryan Pace is an idiot. I think Ryan Pace made a lot of bold moves. I think a lot of them paid off. He whiffed on Trubisky, and that messed a lot of stuff up. Did whiff on Nagy as well, which, shocking after 2018 that's where we are, but that's where we are. But the fact is that there's too many glaring holes in this roster, and those holes are Ryan Pace's fault. And if you look at it, the biggest reason for that is Ryan Pace consistently trading up in the draft and not having enough draft capital. Because, like, you mentioned the names, and there's other names, like Adrian Amos. There's other names in those 4th, 5th, even like a guy like Nick Kwiatkowski.
Bilal Nichols. There are a lot of these that we could go through.
These 4th, 5th round picks that Pace keeps finding. Common sense would say, let me collect as many. Let me pull back from the 3rd round and pick up a couple 4ths. Let me collect as many mid-round picks as I can, because I am as good as anyone in the NFL. And I believe Ryan Pace, if you look at the resume of those 4th, 5th round picks, is as good as anyone in the NFL at finding talent in those spots. And instead, he trades them away to scoot up in the 2nd round or the 3rd round to get, Tevin Jenkins or David Montgomery. And I understand those players are good players, but when you don't have those picks, the Nick Kwiatkowskis of the world, the Deion Bushes, the guys like that you're going to get in the 4th round that don't necessarily become Eddie Jackson or Tariq Cohen when healthy, they still become viable players that when your player gets injured or things don't work out in free agency and you say, all right, I'm going to have to elevate this guy to starter, that they can, be a spot starter and not crush you. And Deion Bush, in his moments when he starts around the secondary of Eddie Jackson and Kyle Fuller and Prince Amukamara and whoever it was, when Bush had to start, he did okay. Right. And that's what those 4th, 5th round picks need to be. That's where you have your depth. You can't sign the Artie Burnses of the world to 1-year contracts and think you're going to have decent depth. There's a reason those guys are all in the scrap heap. You need those mid-round picks. NFL is a next man up, is a next man up league. And when you don't have the next man ready to go, when you have a few injuries, you look decimated because you just don't have the bodies to step in and fill in adequately.
Just none of them either. I mean, what at least has really frustrated me the more I watch them, right? So the Bears are short Allen Robinson. I think everybody knows that. And not to mention
whether he's on the field or not.
Well, I was about to say the Allen Robinson they've gotten on the field has left a void of the Allen Robinson that they've had in the past, which has been a real bummer. But at this stage, Bill, am I crazy for feeling like at this moment, it feels as if Mooney's pretty much the only wide receiver out there. Like, we've got number 85. Yeah. Like, he can catch the ball sometimes. He dropped 2 on stick combos today, which is a real bummer. It remains to be seen whether they were particularly easy catchable balls, but still, for the lot of I don't know. It's weird to talk about Kmet. You and I talked about this in the pre-show. He's the Bears' leading receiver today. He caught like 4 underneath balls, a lot of them in 3rd and billion like situations that helped kind of fluff his numbers, and a really nice ball over the middle. Like, that was a really good play, and dropped 2 drive starters that probably didn't help, right? So, do you hate Kmet? Well, you got your ammo. Do you love Kmet? You probably got your ammo there too. Weird player to discuss. Man, is he a lightning rod? Like, I don't know which one gets talked about.
He really
more.
is. And look, the way Allen Robinson has played, and he's on the shelf again, obviously for a different reason. Whether you like Cole Kmet or hate Cole Kmet, he's the second best receiving option on the Chicago Bears right now. That's how bad it is.
Yeah.
Because Cole Kmet is inconsistent. Even if you like Cole Kmet, you have to sit there and go, well, he does have the drops and he is missing this or missing that. You do have to, if you're objectively looking at Cole Kmet, you're not just looking at the big plays and going, he's amazing, he's the next Travis Kelce. You look at him objectively, you're going to see that there's holes in his game. And he really is the second best receiving option on the Bears.
Yep.
And that's just to show how woeful this offensive unit is that's around Justin Fields.
Mm-hmm. And I feel like he would be a killer 4th option, just to throw it out there. Like, what comes to mind when I keep looking at Kmet at this point, I don't think Kmet is going to be this magical man-separating tight end. And some guys are, some guys are not. Not everybody's Mark Andrews, right? Maybe he grows into that. That'd be great. But the stiffness in his hips when he runs doesn't have me feeling super high about it. But I mean, Bill, you grew up with maybe you didn't grow up, but you watched at the very least the same football I know I did in Dallas growing up. Jason Witten was not the most fluid of hips either. When you're loaded at wide receiver and other skilled talent, you can spread the defense out enough that soft middle of the field, you just spin around, there's 10 yards, right? Tight end doesn't have to be hard. You can make it a brainy position, and it remains to be seen whether Cole can develop that way, because he's about to, bumble and drop, if you want to use a bunch of negative words, his way to 600 yards. In an offense that won't crack 4,000 passing yards. It's funny talking about Kmet in that fashion, and yet, like you said, unquestionable second best receiving option, which has me feeling really bad for JF1.
Yeah, and you bring up that Dallas offense, and we know how great those early 90s Cowboys teams were, and why they were built. That offense was built to perfection. The best offensive line in the league. Troy Aikman was not going to throw for 400 yards and 4 touchdowns. That wasn't his game. But Troy Aikman didn't make mistakes. Troy Aikman was great on 3rd down. Troy Aikman got 3rd down conversions. And when you have Aikman behind that offensive line, and you've got Michael Irvin being the perfect guy to get the volume of passes that he got, and Alvin Harper being the deep threat, and like you said, Jason Witten catching the balls and finding the soft pockets, even a guy like Darryl Johnston, the safety net out of the backfield, and then of course you got Emmett pounding the football for 25 times a game. It was crafted perfectly. Everyone had a role, and when you look at this Bears offense, nobody has a role. That's the problem. All right, Jimmy Graham was brought back clearly to be literally because they don't have red zone threats. And that's why I think Matt Nagy was terrified to not have a red zone threat. And they can't even get in the red zone and utilize Jimmy Graham anyway. And I mentioned this to you before we went live on the air. Let's assume that Jimmy Graham and Allen Robinson are gone. And that's a safe bet that they're both gone after this year. Who is the red zone receiving threat for Justin Fields? Who's the guy that he can throw up and get, a 50-50 jump ball and the guy has a chance to bring it down? He's not on the roster. Whoever is the GM next year is going to have to figure out how to put together a red zone offense, because the pieces that they have on this offense right now are not pieces that are going to help them in the red zone.
I'm always amazed that the Bears don't do more horizontal action with their receivers, period. I mean, let me put it this way, Bill. I come from the simple-minded and somewhat brainless world of playing video games, right? And when they started throwing football into video games, I'm talking all the way back to Tecmo Bowl, right? Most of the time, strength didn't win you everything. You like to juice up your speed and get people on drags and crossers, feed them the ball, and you run a touchdown. It's easy. Like, I've been playing Retro Bowl on my cell phone. Like, high-speed kills. You score like 50 points a game. It's great in like 8 minutes of virtual football. The point being that the Bears just run hitches and curls and like nothing when it comes to crossers or drags or a lot of that vertical action that even in the red zone might help you out. They just don't do it. So there is that element of, hey, maybe if they get an offensive staff that's calling things that sets up their team well to succeed, which what a nothing sentence, right? But it really starts to feel that simple. You and I have been caught in the past, Bill. I'll come out and say it, right? Where you and I have been caught in the past saying, come on, it's got to be more complicated than just he doesn't put his players in position to succeed, right? And here at the end of the 2021 era, it is blowing my mind going back and taking another look at some of the Trubisky times all the way to Justin Fields and this Bears offense right now, how often it feels like they look and misidentify what's good about their own team. It drives me nuts.
Yeah, I think that's a fair point. I mean, how long were Bears fans screaming last year to get Rashad Coward off the field?
Ugh.
It was clear to everyone he could not handle being a starting offensive lineman in the NFL. We all saw it. He was a major problem. He couldn't block. Like he was, giving away plays in his stance because he was shifting his weight, which is not even a high school problem. That's a junior high problem. And it was clear to everyone, and they just kept trotting him out there. And shock of all shocks, when Rashad Coward finally went to the bench, the offense improved. And I'm not saying it wasn't going back to Trubisky and Laser changing some things up. I understand there were other things, but the offensive line improvement was palpable once Howard was gone. And now we're seeing it again with guys like Graham potentially and other things. What they do on a regular basis is in terms of evaluating this roster is really confusing. And I don't understand what's going on behind closed doors. And again, to you talking about, kind of the play calling and the play styles on offense. And look, I get it on a 3rd and 3, and you want to run a 4-yard hitch to just, quick play, pick up the first down and get a fresh set of downs. I get that usage sometimes, but like you're talking about, crossers and doing, some different things and doing some horizontal plays. Let's go back to the Packers game the week before with the Bird touchdown. I understand there was the secondary, the Packers weren't in the right position, but Fields put it in the right spot and Bird caught it and snuck between 2 defenders and he was gone. Because he's just coming across and it just worked because Fields put the ball where Bird could keep running. And we do so much of these hitches and these stop routes where there's no chance for yak. And we thought the whole point of Matt Nagy's offense was going to be giving the guys balls, giving his best players the ball in space so they could do something with it. And it never happens. Nope. Ever.
And with that, it's time to give out game balls. Bill, do you have anybody in mind as we hard pivot to try to end this show under an hour, which has been a real problem for me?
Do I have to give away offensive game balls or can I just stick with the defense?
You know what? How about I give you 2 game balls ambiguous, right?
All right. So 2 game balls. I'm going to give and I'll leave an obvious one for you. I'm not going to give a game ball to Justin Fields, although he played well. And this is going to go to that Kevin Seifert article for a second before I throw in game balls, because I just looked at the ESPN box score, and they finally have put up QBR. Do you know Justin Fields' QBR for this game was 16.5?
Really?
Does that make any sense? Like, I don't understand this statistic at all.
It's got to be the fumble. Like, I don't quite know.
It. He took some bad sacks. Like, I get it, but 16.5, that and Kirk Cousins, by the way, in his Woeful performance was 19.
Yeah.
So according to QBR, Cousins played better than Fields, and
2
I don't
touchdowns.
know who watched that game and would have said that Cousins played better than Fields. So, but for my game balls, I'm going to go up front with both. I'm going to go Robert Quinn, who added 2 more sacks to his total, continues to be a wrecking ball and on pace to break Richard Dent's sack record, which is remarkable. That if you told me in the next 3 years, starting in 2018, that Robert Quinn was going to have that record and not Khalil Mack, I would have thought you were crazy. But I will give one to Robert Quinn, and I will give the other one to Akeem Hicks, the heartbeat of this defense. And we saw Hicks with a retro game a couple years ago. Hicks and Quinn up front, really propelled this defense. I'm giving my game balls to them.
Well, those are great choices. My third game ball. So first I have to start with an honorable mention game ball. I'm still trying to figure out where to go with the fourth game ball, but I don't quite. Well, the problem is that I have to say something about Pat O'Donnell. I have to. Not only has Pat O'Donnell had the best season of his life, but he had like punt of the century. Like, I almost want to go watch all of the other punts in 2021 to see if there was a better punt, Bill, than Bears. It's ridiculous, right?
But a 72-yarder down
the
to
Bears
3.
desperately need a play from somewhere. They haven't gotten it from their returner. He dropped a punt. They're getting it from their defense, but they're not getting anything from their offense. He kicks it over the returner's head. It bounces once and just dies at the 1.5-yard line. Like, you honestly can't draw up a more miraculous 72-yard punt than something where the returner goes back, stares at it so long, he thinks, I guess I should pick it up, and doesn't pick up any instance. I mean, it was bananas. Like, that punt was crazy. And I have to mention it. I can't justify a game ball to the punter. I feel like that is where a franchise is sunk too low. But I can give a game ball to Thomas Graham, who had not one, not two, but 3 pass deflections. It looked like a heady corner at all. Like, my favorite play on that was, so the Vikings dialed up. Look, I'd have to look at it again. But it was a smash similar route concept, which if you don't know is a post tied with some sort of short curl or a drag, something to basically try and force a 1-2 with the cornerback, so that if they play it short, you throw that post, or it's not a post, it's a flag. That's what I've always called it. Other people call it a corner, to the sidelines. If the corner sinks deep, you throw that flag route. If the corner drops off to protect against the flag route, you throw it short. Well, Graham baited Cousins into the flag route, leapt up in the air as high as he could get, and tipped it away anyways. Not to mention, tipped balls in that kind of space, Bill, those are safety interceptions waiting to happen. Like, you love those from a defensive perspective, because that's a ball in the air. Like, you're into it. But so Graham played phenomenally. For my fourth game ball, oh gosh, let me talk something out, okay? So I can't give it to Roquan because he didn't have like that moment that would be like game ball related, but Roquan's been on fire for the last 3 or so weeks. We've wanted him to be that guy, quote unquote, in the defense. I feel like we're seeing it. We're seeing 58 play like he's 40 pounds heavier against the run. Like, he's sticking guys in a way that I think is super neat. On offense, I feel bad giving it to almost literally anybody, especially given that everybody had a good moment, but also a really bad moment. So let me think. I guess, Bill, because I'm not going to give it to Megapunt, I'll give it to David Montgomery just for being a Chicago Bear and fighting through a whole bunch of stuff. Man, you know what? I'll give it to Jesper Horsted. He's the only one who caught a touchdown. Like, right. at some point, who cares, right? Like, what are we gonna do? What are we rewarding here? Like, David had his moments, but he had a fumble, right? Justin had his moments, but he had a fumble. We can't reward a quarterback that fumbles once, right? So Jesper Horsted gets our honorary fourth game ball at this point, if only to make the point of just how, at least I feel like, Bill, we as a fan base could use a breath. Right? The offense is so bad that Louis Riddick, Brian Greasy, and the third guy in the Monday Night Football booth, thank you, Steve Levy, are struggling to like say something nice. You know what I mean? They're hitting the point where Justin Fields on that 4th and 1, they have nothing that they can do but say he had nowhere to go with the ball. Like, it's it's not as if I ever want to sit here and promise next year we win the Super Bowl, because that's how people get disappointed. But with an offense that favors the players that the Bears have on the roster, let alone, Bill, if they sign, say, Michael Gallup and Christian Kirk in free agency, like, they got the opportunity and just enough cash to add some real weapons to this team that they could get a lot better. We're not talking about having to make a big leap to get to, like, average, right? Or to get better. They are, I think, still 32nd in the league. So any dead cat bounce is good for the Bears. And so at this point, Bill, I feel like we are being so mad about what Fields is and what Fields isn't, that he's not a Hall of Fame quarterback in year one of his career, that we're missing real development out of a kid that has next to no help around him. Like, nothing. We're not talking about missing open receivers outside of Darnell Mooney on that post corner, or the corner route they had in the end zone.
Too much air under it. Yep.
Right. That, like, we could pick out the rare mistakes where it's like, no, that one's on him. But other than that, we're just suffering through it. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And here's what I'll say about the offense, and I'm going to try and spin this as positively as I can. First of all, I think as a whole unit, I don't think the offensive line was terrible tonight. I think there were some plays that just were blown up, and I think a lot of times they were telegraphed from the start, and it wasn't just the offensive line. The entire play broke down from the start. I think there may be a game ball hidden. It's tough to do it when you're watching the game live. You need to go back and actually, look at the game in the all 22 to really get the idea on the offensive line. But I do think there's probably someone in there who played pretty well today. But when I look at this offensive line this offensive unit as a group moving forward, if you're a believer in Justin Fields, okay, you got the quarterback. You've got a Montgomery-Herbert 1-2 duo in the backfield. That's nice. If Borum and Jenkins are the bookends, if they're even just average tackles, with Whitehair, who I think is the whole is better than the sum of the parts and plays much better on a better offensive line, and James Daniels, if you keep him around, if you solve center, which probably through free agency, maybe you grab someone in second, third round.
I think Ryan Jensen's hitting the market.
Ryan Jensen could be hitting the market. So if you solve center, you have an offensive line that at least has the ability to be average, right, in front of Justin Fields, which is a step forward. Then you've got Cole Kmet, who is a serviceable tight end. I don't think he's a game breaker. Maybe he will be in a couple of years. I don't think he's ever going to get there. Like you said, stiff hips, some lack of athleticism, some things that you want to see that aren't there right now. But if Cole Kmet is your tight end, and let's just say you shoot for the moon and you get like a Gallup Kirk combo, if you improve the wide receiving unit for Justin Fields and you get a little development out of the offensive line and you've got Montgomery and Herbert, with the right scheme, the right coach in here, this offense, if they spend wisely in free agency, is not that far from being good. It needs the right coach. It needs the money spent in the right places. You need to make sure you're allocating in the right spots and you're allocating properly. But it's not that far off. You can see the pieces, and you need the coach, and you need to fill. There are gaping holes, and they're mostly at wide receiver and center. That's the problem. If you can manage to fill those gaping holes, and you just see a little more development out of this young core a little bit, with the right coach, this offense isn't that far off, which is saying something, being they're 32nd in the league.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I mean, it's not as if, like you're saying, that it is a quick turnaround to contention, but we're talking about a team that might need to take it in chunks, and a good offensive chunk probably a little bit better than getting ever so slightly better at both and still losing a bunch of games. Dang it, Bill. How long, I say, as if I don't know through my 15 years of being a Bears fan, that we consume 8-8 seasons. I mean, as if they're default, But
right. And then on the defensive side of the ball, You need help on defensive line. You don't have enough defensive linemen anymore moving forward. You're going to need someone to sit next to Roquan Smith, at the linebacker position. You need a ton of new people in the secondary. You can't fix everything at once. So if you can only get a piece or two to help the defense next year, your best thing to help the defense is to make this offense hum where you can score some points in chunks and make the other team's offense one-dimensional.
Yep, that's all we can do. Well, Bill, any final thoughts about this game?
I really think we have really just squeezed through everything
here. We're getting the juice out of it. Outside of, I guess, we could talk very little injury nugget. Jakeem Grant, author of one of the wildest loss of 2 punt returns that I've seen in a long time, did leave the game with a concussion. So the very rare threat that the Bears have built is gone. So it's just how the season's gone.
And he's right. Mooney's not getting those explosive plays right now. So really, Grant was really the only one. And who knows if he's going to be back next week? But it's
yep.
Well, 3 games to go, fellas. 3 games to go.
What you got coming up in the pipeline, Bill?
So, the podcast this week, we're going to do something a little different. I'm going to have Randy Merkin on, who is the executive producer, assistant program director of ESPN 1000 in Chicago. Oh. He wrote a book. It's called Behind the Glass, and it's kind of about, being a radio producer in sports and what goes into that. And I've worked with Randy. I started with Randy. We could say Randy was my mentor early in my career.
That's awesome.
Which means for all the Bears fans who listen to my podcast and just be like, I want this guy to shut up, you can blame Randy Merkin. He's the reason I stayed with this career. So there you go. But, I was with him in studio when with the James Allen, Mike Browns game, the James Allen Hail Mary. Like, we were doing a radio show when that went on. I was in studio with him for that whole season, Mike Brown against the 49ers. He's a huge Cubs fan. He used to just call Ernie Banks just to talk to him, and Ernie would just talk to him for 20 minutes. Like, there's a lot of fun Chicago sports stories that I think Randy and I are going to talk about. So we'll talk some Bears, and obviously, but we're just going to do something a little different because we've been talking about this the last couple of weeks. It's Groundhog Day on our podcast right now. We're talking about the same things over and over again as we wait to find out what the Bears season, for all intensive purposes, is over. We're just waiting on Matt Nagy, and we're waiting on Ryan Pace, and then we have some new blood in here and some things to talk about. But until that's there, it feels like Groundhog Day. So we're going to change things up a little bit this week and talk about things a little differently.
I really appreciate it because, like you're saying, I mean, this is, oh gosh, Bill, I was thinking about it at one point. It's going all the way back to the Raiders game where the Bears were coming off fresh win. We were 3-2. Oh, so young, right?
3-2.
3-2.
4-10.
They're now 4-10. So it has been a lot of
1-8 stretch.
It has been a lot, Bill, of, well, the Bears lost again, and we're talking about it again. So
and this season, like 2019 and 2020, decent start, slump in the middle, and 18 and 19 they recovered enough at the end to get back to 500 and be 8-8. And they just don't have it in the tank this year, and that's exactly what's happened. They had the opportunity after the Lions game to maybe recover, and they couldn't, and that's it. That's it for this team. And that's it for Matt Nagy.
I hope they win another game. Like, I'm at that point. I'm at this broken and sad stage, Bill, where I'm looking. I just want to repeat it one sad more time, right? The Bears got Kirk Cousins' worst game ever from a passing yardage perspective, and they didn't win that one. So now how do they beat the Seahawks? They've got to be able to beat Jake Fromm, right? They don't get the revenge game against Mike Glennon. Maybe, but probably not, right? So with Daniel Jones going down in New York, you're probably closer to the zeitgeist there than I am. Like, that means they would have one more shot at the Vikings. But do they beat the Giants?
Yeah, look, you can't think they can beat anyone right now. I mean, can they be competitive? The Giants are just as bad as Chicago. Sure, that's a possibility. But, I'm at this point, I'm almost cheering for the Bears out of spite. Because, look, I'm glad we made the Justin Fields trade, and I think Justin Fields is going to be the guy for the Bears. I still feel strongly about that. But I really don't want the Giants to end up with, like, the 3rd or 4th pick because of that trade. I know I have no ill will towards that team, but I just I don't from a personal standpoint, being around a bunch of Giants fans in New York, I just really can't deal with that. Thank you for the third pick or fourth pick of the draft kind of thing. Look, I don't know if this draft is going to be top heavy, so I guess that's a plus, but can it just be like the 8th pick? Can we just win a couple of these games?
I get you. I mean, I think it's going to be hilarious where when the Giants square up against the Bears, it'll be a win-win or a lose-lose or a win-lose for draft position, depending on where your head's at, because that's both of their picks playing each other. Somebody's got to win that game.
Yeah, the Giants fans will be cheering for a tie.
That would be sickening to my stomach. I don't want to live through 70 minutes of that. But that's
70 minutes of a game. It's like 6-6.
Bill, where can folks find your work online?
At Zimmerman SXM on Twitter. Anything I do, you can find there, and you can find stuff on Windy City Gridiron as well. The Justin Fields quarterback challenge. Anytime you see me tweet about it, make sure you like that tweet. That is $1 towards charity. We have raised $4,500. So it looks like we are going to hit that goal of raising $5,000 for charity this year.
That is so exciting. Unbelievably happy I won one, which is not to brag. It's more to say that I got to help donate to Mental Health of America. So make sure that you're submitting your guess on Zimmerman's Twitter so that if you do get the stats assembly right, whatever you want to call it, you can end up getting to choose where charity money goes, which is awesome. But outside of that, Bill, anything else before we wrap up?
Bear down.
Bear down, absolutely. Thanks so much for hanging out, everybody. Have a great rest of your evening. And that's it. Recording saved, still live. We can sign off whenever at this point because it's midnight in Dallas, which means it's midnight in Chicago. I know you're in Wyoming. Is the weather there fine?
Weather here is actually pretty good. I mean, there's some snow on the ground or whatever, not bad at all. But I've been in and out of Wyoming for the last year for some, helping out some family stuff and, been working remotely mostly. So it's worked out. But I will say there was about a 4 or 5 day stretch in February of this year. And, I've lived in Syracuse, New York. I've lived in Chicago. I have lived in some cold places, like nothing I have ever felt. It was, and I am not exaggerating, the temperatures were in the negative 20s without the wind chill.
What?
And the highs were like negative 15. It was beyond cold. The house that we were living in, the temperature couldn't get above about 55 with the heat churning all the time. It was frigid.
What in the
world? Don't visit Wyoming in the winter, people.
Oh my gosh.
Visit in the summer, go to Yellowstone, enjoy the scenery, but don't come in December, January, or February. Do not do it.
My poor Texas body doesn't even know how to comprehend that, Bill. Like,
I'll tell you, and I'm guessing you'll remember this. When Dallas had the Super Bowl, I was in Dallas. And
I got to go to that one. That was, it was funny because looking back, it was a really fun game to go to. I was at the Packers Super Bowl win.
So that week in Dallas, there was an ice storm. And Dallas is totally, it's not their fault. Why should they be, hoarding salt for potential ice storms that come once every 2 decades?
Right.
But there was salt. They had to ship salt in from St. Louis, but they had to drive it in. It was going to take days to get in. The roads were shut down. You couldn't get anywhere because the roads were iced everywhere. Like the cabs were just basically said, screw it, I'm not going anywhere. I'm going to crash my car. So no one could get anywhere. And I remember it was like Thursday or Friday of that week. And Dallas, Texas was the coldest place in the 48 United States.
That is so funny.
Dallas, it was like 1 degree in Dallas, Texas. We're like, what is going on?
It gets weird that way. I mean, we get snow every 2 years, And I would say that we have about a decade-ish ice storm. We had ours recently. I don't know. I can't quite remember. There was another bad one fairly recently where my friend and I finally got to bust out our ice skates so that we didn't have to just go to like the local malls. We could just go skate on like a tennis court or something because they don't have HOA rules in Texas because they don't think about it. So, but that's a story for another time. I know. That is, man, I guess I'll just avoid Wyoming at this point because I don't think I want to deal with that.
Go in the summer. Go up to Yellowstone. It's amazing. Just
right.
December, January, February. Just cross it off.
Bill, we've got some, I don't want to say questions. Well, they're questions and their comments in the chat here. We got somebody asking what we think about Justin Fields. I feel like both of us are in the same place, right? Where, let me even synthesize it, right? There's plenty of bad. The bad's very obvious. There's plenty of good. I think the good's very obvious. But the real key that if you're feeling like I am, Bill, is that it almost doesn't matter. He's obviously the quarterback for next year. So either way, it's not like he's going anywhere. And whether he develops, whether he doesn't, whether he gels with the next coach, whether he doesn't, it's almost a story to be answered later. And trying to suss out the answer now is almost unhelpful when you end up watching an offense that doesn't have any possible way to gain yards within the 10-yard line. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah, and here's what I'll say about Fields. You know, you said this on my podcast last week. You said he's improving. You said something like, I don't care if the numbers don't show it. I'm watching with the eye test. I can see he's improving.
Right.
So, you know, being that Fields' numbers aren't exactly gaudy, and a lot of that,
and
one, yes, he's a rookie quarterback, and two, he's, you know, in a horrendous offense. But I wanted to go look at it. And I think a lot of people are remembering the Browns game and some of the struggles early on. You know, the Tampa game was a Nance and Romo game, so everyone got to see that. His yards per attempt, and I didn't crunch December because December at the time I was looking at this only had the Packers game, so there wasn't enough of a sample size. And obviously these are all smaller sample size, but yards per attempt, 3.9 in September, 6.9 in October, 9.3 in November. Passer rating, is it flawed? Sure. But 39.9 in September, 73 in October, 82.3 in November. Yards passing per game, 46, 170, 185. His sack percentage has dropped from 24 down to about 10 or 11, and now it's down into the single digits in December. Touchdown interception ratio was 0-1, 1-2, and then 1-1 in November. And look, I think this is the first time he's got a touch. I could be wrong, but I think this is the first time he's had a touchdown pass with no interceptions in the game. Like there's improvement. And even I know Kevin Seifert from ESPN put that article in there just crushing Fields because of his QBR. And, you know, we mentioned it earlier. I don't understand why his QBR was so bad today. I'm not saying it needed to be, 75, but I don't understand why it was as low as it was. His QBR in September has gone up steadily from September. I just lost my tweet here. Hang on one quick second. Justin Fields in his QBR is, here we go, 7.7 in September. October 1st to October 30th, those 4 games, 23.7. October 31st to November 30th, 47.1. And for reference on the 47.1, Dak's QBR for the year, 47.5. So we're seeing steady improvement from Fields in a woeful offense. And while the numbers aren't gaudy, that's all you can ask for.
And not to mention, Bill, one thing that I know I've had a lot of real trouble with, like, just as I try to think through this whole thing, right? Because I don't want to be stupid. I don't think any Bears fan wants to be stupid, right? None of us, or at least the majority of the people who are listening and watching live right now, don't want to sucker themselves into something that isn't real. You know what I mean? We're not trying to sell ourselves on a nothing so that we can have a fake fun 2 years or something like that. And then, it turns out he's bad. You know what I mean? But so the point is that if where Fields really is struggling right now, he was struggling in sack percentages for good reason, right? But he's also been struggling in anything that aggregates the offense in with the quarterback. Right? So whether it is adjusted net yards per attempt, which is very sack heavy, and holy moly, you mentioned it earlier that he had a 24% sack percentage in September. So unbelievably bad. Like, it's bad to have an 8%, right? So at this point, like, you're 24%, that's honestly, it doesn't belong in the NFL is really the only way to put it. But so all of this, like, there's not a lot of stats out there, QBR being one of them, that can pull out a quarterback doing little things well, even if he's missing on certain macro things, from an offense that is not doing any favors. Like, let's take the Demir Bird touchdown, right? Obviously, this is a big hyperbolic example, but Fields made one small good play and got a massive amount of statistical, like, thumbs up from that, right? 65-ish yard touchdown off of an 11-yard throw. But the question is does QBR factor in it's the whole question, Bill, to your exact point of, did Daboll's offense get worse or did Josh Allen fall off? Is Andy Reid calling the offense badly this year? Or is Mahomes just really struggling against too high? A lot of times, if you think about it, because I know you can think of plenty of other examples as soon as I address the concept, people tend to lump coaching in with quarterback play, right? They kind of think of them as the same organism. And we credit Sean Payton and Drew Brees, and we criticize stupid Bruce Arians and Jameis Winston, because why would Bruce Arians be any good with, wow, he won the Super Bowl with Tom Brady, huh? Like, now Bruce Arians' offense is phenomenal, amazing. People love the way that Bruce Arians doesn't stay near the late hours of anybody else, even though that's like standard across the league, is to basically like exist outside of your family for the better part of 6 to 7 months. But Bruce Arians, he could do it his way because he won a Super Bowl with Tom Brady. Does this make sense? Like, where my head's at?
It makes perfect sense. And look, when you look at coaches, the all-time great coaches, when you hear the name, almost every time there is a quarterback that you will associate with him. Going all the way back to George Halas, Sid Luckman, Vince Lombardi, Bart Starr, Chuck Noll, Terry Bradshaw. Don Shula had Bob Greasy and Dan Marino. And then you go more recently, Bill Walsh, Joe Montana, Bill Belichick, Tom Brady, Sean Payton, Drew Brees. Like, they all have the quarterback, all of them, the great coach, Tony Dungy, Peyton Manning. They've all got the great quarterback to go with them.
Andy Reid, he had the great quarterback in Philly. He lost the great quarterback. He got fired. He went to Kansas City. He got the great quarterback, and now he's back.
Now he's won a Super Bowl. And here's the thing, like, Andy Reid was the guy who couldn't win the big one, right? He's almost like the John Elway of coaches because he couldn't win the big one, couldn't get there with McNabb. He got to the Super Bowl, but he couldn't win. And then he gets Patrick Mahomes and he wins one. And if he wants to stick around another 5, 6 years, 7 years, and Mahomes can win him a couple more and he can win like 3 Super Bowls, Andy Reid's going to go from the guy who couldn't win the big one to a top 10, maybe top 5 coach of all time with the amount of wins he's going to amass. And then he's going to have 2, 3, 4 Super Bowl wins, depending on what him and Mahomes can do together.
Right.
Like, that's what a great quarterback can do for a coaching resume.
Mm-hmm. And on the other side of it, I mean, let me pick another example, right? The Russell Wilson-less Seahawks look bad. So is Pete Carroll a bad coach? Well, no. He won a Super Bowl. He went to another Super Bowl. Like,
almost won it, yeah.
Pete Carroll in the NFL isn't a bad coach, but without his Hall of Famer, obviously it looks worse. Okay, compared to Andy Reid with, oh my gosh, who's the guy they have backing them up now? It's not Henne, right? Is it Henne?
Oh, God. No, I don't think it's Henne.
No, it's not Matt Moore. It might be Matt Moore, as a matter of fact. But I'd have to look it up later. But the point is that if you took coaches and tried to quantify them as who are they with their backups, obviously Belichick's an animal, right? It feels like whatever quarterback he throws out there.
Interrupt you, it is Chad Henne.
Okay, it is Chad Henne. They look good with Henne in the game. But who cares about what Pete is with Geno Smith and like that brand of the Seahawks? You got Russell Wilson. The point being, as I take a look at this, right, to circle all the way back, Fields' big-time throw percentage, which is something tracked by PFF, is really, really good. When you compare Fields' EPA per play plus composite completion percentage, it's not only good for rookies, it's good for the whole NFL. Like, especially if you take out September, which most people would tell you shouldn't do that. But if you do, then it gets even better. Like, he's in that, what is it, top 14, top 12%, and let alone having, I think it's a top 5 big time throw percentage per PFF and a top 10 yards per attempt per quarterbacks in the NFL. Like, there are these individual stats that generally have correlated with really high level quarterback play the Phil's actually showing out in. But gosh, Bill, it's everything else that's not just bad, it's not just meh, it's abysmal. His his adjusted net yards per attempt is woeful. Like,
it's like 3, right?
It's like it's below 4, and 5 is bad. Like, it's so who is Fields? I feel like it remains to be seen. Like, obviously, we could talk about the glitter. We could talk about what we hope will be gold, right? But truth be told, Bill, it drove me nuts when Bears fans in the offseason hyped up Kindle Vildor, and it'll drive me nuts this season when Bears fans say Justin had a great year. I think he got better. I think he is developing, right? To turn it into our, like, that he had an amazing year, I feel like is missing the picture a little bit. Does this make sense?
Yeah, no, that makes sense. No, Justin Fields has struggled this year. Justin Fields, in the full body of work, has not been good. All right, we have to look at it fair. But he is a rookie quarterback. Most rookie quarterbacks are not good.
Better than Trevor Lawrence.
Yeah, Justin Fields is also in a bad situation. But like you said, there are certain statistical categories that a lot of the analytics and a lot of people like to look at and go, this is really what separates good, the best quarterbacks from the rest of the pack. And we're seeing Fields excel in those categories. So that's where it's exciting, where you can sit there and say, if Fields continues to develop, you feel like the floor is going to be a guy who 1 week throws for 400 yards and 4 touchdowns, and the next week throws for 120 yards and 3 interceptions. And you feel like he's going to be kind of all over the place. If he can keep raising the floor, which we've seen him do this season, that's where there's the hope that he can be, I don't like to say Lamar Jackson because I think they're different quarterbacks, but he can be a Russell Wilson. He can be, I don't want to put him in like the Patrick Mahomes category, even though Mahomes is down this year, but he can be a top 5 to 7 quarterback in the league if he can raise the floor and eliminate those mistakes. And if he can't, I still think the Bears have a mega talent on their hands, but it's one that's going to be inconsistent.
Yep. And hey, inconsistent is a great, first of all, I see a comment about, like, remember when everybody said if Trubisky can continue to develop? Yeah, I do. Because after the 2018 season, I know I was ready for that Trubisky 2019. And oh my gosh, Bill, I never want to relive 2019 week 1 ever again. That was one of the worst Bears games I think I've ever watched in terms of just emotions. But
there was so much hope, and that all of a sudden, because again, let's remember 2018 playoffs against Philadelphia. Trubisky had a nice second half.
Oh yeah,
he really did. He made some throws. He made some clutch throws. I remember tweeting out that the Mitch Trubisky sucks argument died tonight. Like, I was that confident that this guy on this 12-4 team with this big second half in the playoffs was going to make the jump in 2019. A lot of people did. Look, to be fair, a lot of national people did not think Trubisky was going to jump. I think, we might have missed the forest for the trees there a little bit as people who were excited coming out of that 2018 team. But that early part of 2019, I'll tell you, it was almost freeing for me after the Saints game that year in like week 6, 7, whatever it was, where I was completely out on Mitch. That was the game. And if you look at the numbers, they don't look that bad because he threw for like 200 yards in the fourth quarter when the Bears were down like 30 points, whatever it was. But that was the game for me where I was just like, I'm out on this guy. He's not going to be the guy. And it was almost freeing to watch the rest of the season knowing the Bears hadn't solved quarterback, just like it had been for pretty much my whole life as Bears fandom. But those first few games and clinging to things like we did, like the throw against the Broncos that set up the game-winning field goal. Like, you're just clinging to one play. Or the the pass to Gabriel, right? That was
Oh my gosh, week 3, 2019.
Yeah,
that was
the pass
where
to Gabriel.
But
where I
remember,
got in a huge Twitter argument with Ryan Clark defending Mitch Trubisky because Ryan Clark called him Ryan Leaf, and I yelled at him on Twitter, and he responded, and we started going back and forth. Like it was like that early part of 2019 where you're just clinging to one or two plays a game, going Mitch has it, and ignoring so much else in just this hope. It was so frustrating, and it unraveled.
Well, and it's so funny to think about it because, like, another thing, like, you want to talk about the effective coaching. I can't believe I'm saying this, and I'm not to defend Nagy. Just ride with me, everybody. We all know that Nagy's best years were 18 and 19 from an offensive perspective. But, Bill, that disclaimer aside, think about that Washington game in 2019. Matt Nagy pulled out 2 trick plays that got, like, Mitch Trubisky a 3-touchdown game with one, let's call it, touchdown throw. You know what I mean? That throw to Gabriel, amazing. The other touchdown he had to Gabriel, and then, actually, I think they were all to Gabriel, as a matter of fact. They had the fake pick play. They had another one where they faked it to Cohen, and everybody just assaulted Cohen. And he just flicked it to Gabriel for like a 1-yarder. And then he had the incredible, like, 37-yard bomb in a dirty pocket. Awesome. You compare that with, like, the 6-touchdown game against Tampa Bay. Like, old Matt Nagy used to just manufacture touchdowns for his quarterback. Hey, maybe some of it was Trubisky being able to put the ball in the right place. Like, you can't make up the that rope he had to Trey Burton, who was a good little player in 2018 against Tampa Bay. But yeah, I mean, nowadays, Justin Fields can't buy a touchdown. Like,
yeah, and that Washington, just talking about Nagy for a second, that Washington game was interesting because if you remember, they went Sean McVay.
Ultra no huddle.
They just, like, Nagy was basically calling the defense for Trubisky at the line of scrimmage. I was like, is this where we're going? Is this what's happening? And they never went back to it, and Nagy's offensive decisions kept getting worse and worse. And, yeah, I don't know what happened, but, you know, you look back at some of those games in 2019, and it's just that's a bizarre season and a frustrating one at that.
Gross and sad. Steven, thanks so much for subscribing. You found a Bears channel. That means it's pretty sad. at least right now. I mean, but Bill, we've hit the point where it's 12:25. I've got to go and like record, or I've got to, take this podcast and edit it. And so thank you so much for coming on. Super great having you.
So enjoy your late night, chopping this thing up.
You bet. Absolutely. Have a great night, everybody. See you on Wednesday as we'll go through this game. We actually have some fun defense tape to talk through. So that'll be great. And then probably more offense because that's all we talk about. But have a great one, everybody. Talk to you later.